Hi, with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. And I'm sitting here with a rather good cup of coffee, actually. And thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a movement that was across the white Western world in the late 1800s and has really continued in different forms and iterations right up to the present day. And we're seeing the fruits, or the rotting fruits, I should say, of what's become a misguided policy, if not one hijacked by the globalists in the 30, 40 years ago. So it was the industrialized, scientifically advanced white West was looking across all of Africa and most of Asia and just seeing how a lot of these societies were many hundreds of years behind the West, if not thousands of years behind. There was still a lot of societies around the world and around Africa that were really barely out of the Stone Age. And so the major colonial powers of the time, but others as well, they sort of speculated, how can we get these societies these third world societies to catch up with the West, or at least reach some sort of stage of self-sufficiency. Now, the white people didn't want the burden of caring for all these hundreds of millions of black and brown people, and wanted some way of making these people productive. When I say productive, the ability at least to become self-sufficient to a large extent. So this wasn't all a noble undertaking. There was a very practical side to it. We don't want these people engaging in constant tribal warfare. If we build a railroad track there, we don't want them tearing up the track to get the wooden sleepers so they can build their huts that they're going to set fire to anyway. We don't want the constant fratricide and all the sort of things that go on in these communities. We want them to be able to plant crops and live a self-sufficient lifestyle. We don't want the neighbouring village come along and burning the crops, and we want to stop the secret and illicit slavery that goes on in Africa. So there was a lot of good things that would have come from it: the stopping of slavery, the various subjugation, the killing off of unwanted infants, and so on. But again, the tribal wars. So there was a lot of attempt to try and remedy that. Now the belief was, if we can create a black middle class, or could be a middle class anywhere, could have been in what modern day Bangladesh or Pakistan. If we can create a middle class that's invested deeply in their society, then what they will be able to do is stop the bad practices, or most of them, encourage the good practices, such as tending fields, running profitable farms that grow enough food for everybody, and creating law-abiding, sensible behaviour, the stopping of slavery. So we need to create a black middle class that's going to, in Africa's case, a black middle class that's going to invest in their society and create stable, functioning, not necessarily democracies, although that was a partial objective, but create stable societies, self-sufficient societies. So this was the view. So let's create a black middle class. Now it went in sort of fits and spurts, and it's all very well to say, let's create a black middle class in Africa, but how do you do it? How do you go about it? Well, there were, some people said, well, let's bring them to the universities of the West, universities in England, for example. Let's give them nice houses with nice lawns to tend, so that let's make them less tribal, and more national. Let's try and encourage them to they get a university degree in London. Let's keep them working in England for 5 years in the public service, so they understand the concept of public service and the common good. Let's do these things, and then they can go back to Africa or wherever. Again, could be parts of Asia, and they'll create this. Or be instrumental in preventing the failed state type situation that they saw in Africa. So it wasn't simply a case of advancing technical knowledge and things like that, although that was part of it, but it was also the idea of creating a stable society, because all around them they just saw these Stone Age tribes making constant petty bickering warfare on each other and getting nowhere, that every time there was a year of drought, there'd be dying people, just dying of starvation in their millions and things like that. This is something the white people genuinely wanted to stop. They couldn't say, well, why? There's no reason you need to die like this. If you tend your fields and grow your crops and stop burning each other's crops down, then you can do all right. But they had a difficult time stopping that entrenched behaviour, that criminal behaviour, which, by the way, you see in any black society anywhere in the world today, whether it be the United States or Britain or anywhere. So it's something that no matter how hard white people try, they can't seem to stop that sort of behaviour. Even transplanting these people into white societies, that the behaviour still continues as if they were still running around in the Stone Age in Africa. But anyway, this was the idea. So create this middle class. Now that idea was it never sort of went away, even though it had failed, and even though it was unsuccessful in a lot of ways, minimally successful in some ways. Even people, when they came back to Africa after having spent 10, 15 years in, for example, London or the West, somewhere in the West, getting their degrees, working in the public service, being taught the technical skills and so on, as soon as they went back to Africa, they went straight back into their tribal, corrupt behaviour, and again the society they were supposed to be helping turned into a basket case, and they took the view, well, we don't give a shit as long as I'm doing all right and my buddies are doing okay, as long as my family's doing all right, I don't care if everything else around me is crashing to the ground. And this was something that white people just couldn't get their heads around. They go, well, gee, why would you do that? Why don't you try and make your whole society better? Well, why should I do that? I want the benefit. I want someone else to have it, was the attitude. And you see that, all across Africa. As soon as the whites were gone, the prosperous society just quickly generated into a basket case, and quite quickly. If you look at South Africa, by far the richest place in Africa, and the black people in charge just running it into the ground, through corruption and incompetence, ineptitude, and lack of maintenance, and insane concepts of equal outcomes that are just destroying everything. And as the wealth gets smaller and smaller, the people at the top, take a bigger and bigger corrupt share of the pie, leaving their own fellow citizens, even and tribal members in poverty, just so they can live like the kings of old. So anyway, this idea of creating the middle class never went away, and I think the closest that probably came to achieving it would have maybe been in 1950s and early 1960s United States. Now, there are a lot of black workers working in, say, the production lines of manufacturing centres like Detroit, as a case in point. Now, because of the purchasing power of the paycheck in those days, those black people could live really a middle class lifestyle. They could afford to buy a house, they could afford to buy a car, they could afford to go on an annual vacation somewhere, and they were doing okay. Now, when manufacturing went off the boil in the United States, and the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s came into play, it drastically changed the architecture of what had been a very young and emerging black middle class. And from what I can see, it set the whole the whole. I mean, it almost eradicated the black middle class into being a very small. Very small section of the black community, and I see that as a tragedy. But nonetheless, coming back to this idea of creating a middle class, now the idea is alive and well in England and in many Western countries, but we'll take England as an example. And if you look at the way they go about creating a middle class, so the idea, if you're going to create a middle class, make it organic and natural, that the brightest kids, percolate to the top at the schools, and that they then win jobs on merit, and they then buy their houses and have their children, and then their children. And well, if you work hard and you study hard at school, and you make the extra effort, you live a prudent and sensible lifestyle. You don't go to the gambling dens or booze it away or do lines of coke or something. You live a sensible, restrained, prudent, thrifty lifestyle, then you can do quite well for yourself. But that's not enough for the activist political class, and certainly not enough for the globalists. So we see in England this creation of a middle class. You see people like the David Olusogas and so on, but they've gone about it. So they're selecting people. We're going to make a middle class person out of this family or the offspring of this family. They're going to be a voice for black people or for people from Bangladesh or Pakistan or wherever within the white community. Now I'm looking at one here, and this is a classic case. This is a woman. Now her parents came from Bangladesh, and what's today Bangladesh. I think it was a couple of years before it became Bangladesh. I think it was East Pakistan before that, or West Pakistan. So her parents come to England as migrants. I don't know what basis, but they were quite devout. I mean, names of Muhammad and Abdul all over their background there. So they're quite devout and pious Islamists, and so why would they come to a Christian community and be invited to come? That's another matter. But so they arrive. The children are born, and incredibly, I think the guy was an accountant, but incredibly, when the girl's 8 years old, she's suddenly discovered as being this brilliant female brown student in England, and she gets gigs on television. So clearly there are powerful forces pushing her out front as a poster child. The woman's not gifted or bright or industrious. There's nothing to recommend her at all. But somewhere, some shaker mover has decided, no, that family, those kids, we're going to make a middle class out of them. So she then gets a stunning series of breaks, one after the other. A dream path, scholarships, benefits and gifts are just showered upon her constantly. Now, her attitude today, and she's a parliamentarian in Britain now, her attitude today is one of some silly little punk spoiled brat, entitled, snot-nosed, the whole 9 yards. You wouldn't, unimpressive in every way, and yet, and got that snotty sort of first year sociology uni student at a left-wing university attitude. I mean, she sounds and talks like a fucking snotty schoolgirl, and she's got to be in her 50s now. So she's just one of many examples, by the way. I'm picking on her because it came up in the news recently, so I'm only selecting her as an example because of that. But it's got the classic paw prints of the globalist establishment creating we're going to artificially create a middle class. We're not going to allow natural forces or natural abilities or anything organic. We're going to control it and create one, as if you create things in a factory out the back and the robots and wheel them out. So she's effectively a globalist zombie today. But anyway, now I don't know whether or not the good capitalist forces were starting the process, but it got hijacked by the globalists and thought, well, we'll take over that architecture, that machinery, and then we can use those people to hate the West and hate white people. It's astonishing, the society that has showered taxpayer-funded gifts upon this woman, one after the other. She's never had a fucking job in her life. She's been gifted every job she's had, well-paid jobs, consulting jobs, coming out of her ears that are well-paid. A tenure at universities as lecturing and so on. For someone as ordinary, as dim-witted as her, it's like what a joke. So she gets put through high school and so on with scholarships, then going to all these international universities and to sails through it, PhDs, the highest possible pass marks you can get at a university, she gets them, and on it goes. So a dream run. Again, never had a job in her life. Everything has been gifted, and then suddenly one of the major political parties in England or Britain decides that they're going to gift her a very safe electoral district in the Parliament. So she now sits in the Parliament, pulling that salary, going on NGOs are paying her to go on, speaking tours. Now, her only job, by the way, she's brown, but her only job is to denounce white people, to denounce white history, to denounce white heritage, to denounce, the white political system. Her sole job is to denounce white people and to trash and denigrate any brown or black people that aren't themselves also denigrating white people and white establishments and white history and white heritage and so on. So she has an absolutely vehement, abiding hatred for everything white and everything historically white, and yet sits in a and yet has been given all these gifts. Now, she's obviously operating under globalist instructions because it just so happens that her views accord fully with the globalist project. So we have to swamp England and the West generally, all the white countries, and only uniquely the white. No other countries have to be swamped. Just white countries have to be swamped with black and brown peasants, and that's only socially just. And we have to have LGBT, all the fault lines, the climate change, the race, gender, the sexuality, all the fault lines the globalists use to destroy and undermine Western society. She is totally on board with and never stops talking about. So she's obviously a globalist stooge and has been handsomely rewarded for it. But if you look at the amount of brown and black people all across the West that are these, artificially created middle class people, they're not, and when I say artificially created, that they wouldn't have got anywhere on their own merits. Now, not only are they suppressing the brown and black people who would have got somewhere on their own merits, well, be they few or not, that's beside the point. They would have got there on their own merits, but they're also creating an artificial commentariat class controlled by the globalists who have the protection of being, well, I'm a woman and I'm brown. You're a misogynist racist if you disagree with me, and this sort of stuff. And so they're all across the Western world. This middle class has been created. It's no accident. I mean, this is a premeditated plan to create an activist commentariat, brown-black middle class in the West. A bit like the old sleeper agents from the Cold War era, and these people are being activated for the sole purpose of trashing and denouncing the West. And we allow it to happen, and we listen to these people, allow them to do it, pay them to do it. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.